Hi, this is your host Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us two esteemed guests from Red Hat, Paul Cormier, Chairman of Red Hat, and Matt Hicks, the new CEO of Red Hat. Matt, Paul, it's great to have you both on the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, Matt, I would start with you. Tell us, if I ask you, when we look at Red Hat today, and I mean, Red Hat has been around, I think the Linux, when it started, Red Hat was the one which kind of commercialized, open source. And now we live in a totally clouded world where everything, once again, is driven by Linux and open source. We don't even talk about it anymore because it has become de facto. So if I ask you, how do you see Red Hat in today's world?
Yeah, I think for us, and we've been on this path for a while, of the importance of open hybrid cloud, on that the core tenets being it's built on open innovation and open source, which has gone well beyond Linux at this point. And then when we look at hybrid, it's gone from just on-premise to private cloud to public cloud to multi-public cloud, and now to include the edge. And I think Red Hat has the opportunity to take that open innovation from open source that we know well, we've done that with Linux for years, and extend that to every footprint in open hybrid cloud.
Now, I'll come to you, Paul. I want to hear your take on this. Where do you see Red Hat today?
I oftentimes say this, Red Hat is, a lot of people like to say Red Hat's an open source company. Red Hat is an enterprise software company with an open source development model. So everything that Matt said about where we are with open hybrid cloud, et cetera, all that's been driven by open source and development, and I think Red Hat had a lot to do with it. But at its heart, Red Hat's an enterprise software company, which means we're in the business of helping commercial customers, enterprisers consume open source to solve their business problems. But we're 100% open source development model. That's what gives us the innovation.
When I look at open source, I feel that open source can solve day one problem, and that's where it stops, and that's where commercialization or folks like Red Hat, they play a very big role, because without that, folks will not be able to solve any day two problem. Now I go back to, once again, Paul, I want to also kind of curious to understand what led you to kind of decide to step back from the role of CEO, and as chairman, how are you going to lead and guide Red Hat?
Well, I've been here for 21 years. When I came into the company, we were focused solely on retail, on the consumer, and made the pivot to enterprise. Long 21 years, we got a lot done there. Matt's been with us for 15 years. I've partnered closely with Matt for 10 of those 15 years, and he's the best leader we've had in the company for since I can remember, probably including me. So it was just a great time. There were three big things I really wanted to get done after the IBM acquisition. It was a very different acquisition for IBM in that we had to make sure, and we partnered with Arvind on this, had to make sure where the red line was and where the blue line was, essentially how we were going to partner with each other. I think we've got that well in hand. We were in the process of changing our go-to-market model. We have been in that process for a while, to a cloud-based software economy, and I think we're way well down that path and done a really good job with that. And as well as we had brought in some new members of the management team and wanted to get that stable. And I think over the last 3 years, we really accomplished all those things. Matt's been a huge part of those things. So it was time. It was time. Leaving this in the best hands imaginable with Matt. And so still very involved here. And Matt and I have always had a great partnership, and it's just a little different partnership this time, but really not that different. We still talk about a lot of things all the time.
Right. And Matt, there are some really big shoes, but you have been around for so long. So, the interesting thing is when I look at the community of like Red Hat, the folks, they've been so around that it looked like, hey, I grew up with those folks. So sometimes when I ask this question, it looked like, era is changing there. So if I ask you, as the new CEO, what does this mean, for your day-to-day involvement, or, what vision do you have for Red Hat there?
Yeah, I think Paul talked about the first part, where I've been lucky enough to, I usually say I've worked within 20 feet, I think, of Paul for the last decade plus. And I've gotten to absorb a lot of his intuition of the market, his intuition of how we strike that balance between being a great open source participant and then also being an enterprise software provider. I've worked hand in hand with him we have that shared passion around open hybrid cloud, composing the team that we work with. I've been able to be involved every step of that journey. And so it's a great opportunity to be able to sit in this seat and say, I've had a hand in the team that I'm working with. I love the strategy. I have grown up around this strategy and seen it implement. And so really it's execution focused on this, where I do think cloud and the services and commercial models to compete well there, that'll always stretch us because it evolves quick. Edge it's just a different way of providing our products. It's different use cases. So those are exciting, but it's always been on our core strategic path. So really that's I think the challenge in front of me is execute to a really great strategy and foundation we have in place.
Right. If you look at Red Hat, from very, you guys, folks broke a lot of grounds, not only with the Red Hat Linux, but, with OpenShift and, moved to other areas as well. It's been a long journey, but if I ask you in today's world, what are the new challenges that you see that are there that are like, hey, this is that we have to tackle? Or you say, no, the ride is so smooth that we just sail smoothly?
I think if you look at the new challenges, I would actually say, I think we have a great technology fit. We know Linux and Kubernetes that work into RHEL and OpenShift as our core platform layers. We know we need management as customers scale into these large environments, and we have Ansible there that fits that core trio for us of how we provide platforms and the management around them. I think the challenge will be, how do you provide these commercially in the ways that customers want to consume them? Public cloud has really taught customers a different way of consuming software on demand, different models, spot pricing, and all of these things. And then when you go into edge deployments, it's the world of embedded software. And for us, we're a platform provider. And so we want to provide this consistency in commercial models across all of them. That'll probably be our challenge. And I think it's exciting for me because we did this in the early days, 20 or so years ago, with our subscription model to open source software. That'll be the creativity and art ahead of us, is how do we find that right blend of commercial models where customers feel like they can subscribe to Red Hat and have it available in the best form factor in any of these environments that they do. So that's it'll be a challenge, but it's an exciting one, and we have some history there as well in the industry.
Paul, if I ask, where you sit there, the beauty is that these days, in the early days, the adoption of Kubernetes, other technologies were by the tech behemoths who had a lot of tech, in-house capabilities. Now everybody is embracing these technologies. A lot of folks, they are not tech companies. Today, you have to have this strategy if you want to survive. How do you look at that challenge from that perspective, and how do you see that Red Hat, IBM, they can, help those users as well?
That's one of our biggest challenges as well. But I think we've made some good headway over the last couple of years. Let me explain. In one hand, we've made open source so consumable and so synonymous with innovation in the enterprise. And as I said, open source is a development model. So on one hand, we made it consumable and successful, but on the other hand, there's also been a lot of confusion or just not understanding that it's a development model. It's not a product. It's a project, not a product. And so a lot of people have seen, Kubernetes, for example, right? Everybody's running Kubernetes, everybody's running containers, they're all the same. I can just, build my application on one Kubernetes platform over here, and it's just going to magically work on the other platform over there. It doesn't work that way, right? These are development models, not products. And so just that education that they're all from the same innovation pool, but the implementations and the life cycles and the ecosystems around them are all different. And so clearing up that confusion has been a challenge for us, and I think it continues to be a challenge. Having said that, I think it's gotten much better as CIOs and IT departments have gone to implement and move their application to cloud providers. They've understood, because they've had to do it, that if I build something on Amazon, that's great if it's going to run in Amazon, but if I'm going to want to run that in Azure or even on premise, probably gonna have to rebuild it again, and depending on how deep into the services the cloud provider I went, I might have to choose different services, etc. And so that's where we come in to really level that playing field. That understanding started to come as CIOs really started to move and get into it and understand that. So I think that's been one of our challenges. It'll probably always be a challenge, but it's education and it's really all around that. So I think that still will continue to be one of the challenges, and we just have to keep showing our customer base what we do and the value of it. When they see it, it's like a light bulb goes off for them in many cases.
Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I totally agree with Paul. And I would say an area we have focused on, which is exciting for us. Open source has moved from being a tool that was in use by experts that were sort of in the know 20 years ago. To your point, it's used by every company at this point. Every company is dealing with software innovation. And one of the things that we've really tried to embrace is that for a long time, we provided software for customers to run themselves. And that requires some expertise. And as software gets more complex, it requires more expertise. We've actually started on a journey of providing the software that we run for our customers as well. So if you believe in the architectural model of containers and Kubernetes, you feel like it gives you the portability and the reach, but you don't have the skill set right now to run Kubernetes yourself. That's something that Red Hat does. We actually know how to run OpenShift quite well on this. We do this in all the public clouds. So we can provide the consistency Paul described, give you some early guidance as to how do you keep things like your secure supply chain intact as you start, but then take a lot of the operational lift and overhead skill building off their plate on day one. And I think that's been helpful for us in widening our reach from the tech behemoths to every enterprise on the planet at this point that wants to use that technology to their benefit, but doesn't always have the skills on day one to get started.
You brought the point of skill, and we are actually, Linux Foundation, they keep coming up with reports, everybody, that there is a huge gap in supply and demand of skilled folks. So can you also, and this problem is not going to go away. The adoption of these technology will grow, but the shortage will still be there. So once again, if you can just kind of touch upon that, how once again, Red Hat technology solutions help companies that despite the crunch in a skill gap, they can embrace, because sometimes it slows them down. They cannot find folks who are skilled with these technologies.
Yeah, I would say this has been our mission from day one and continues to be our mission. When I started with Linux 20 plus years ago, you had to have a tremendous amount of, literally you had to compile your own kernel to start. And then when you got outside of the kernel, you were downloading your own tarballs from the internet and building them, composing your software stack. Red Hat in the earliest days with RHEL 2.1 removed all of that complexity, where you could get the software, you could trust the provenance of it. It was going to work on multiple hardware types. Today, we're doing that same thing on multiple levels. One, you can trust the software and the origin. We curate open source. If you're missing operational skills, we provide those services to it. When you try to bridge them into your existing world, we provide the management, we provide migration tooling to help get you there. So our purpose in life, I would argue, is taking that open source innovation and then making it consumable for companies that won't have all the skills to do it themselves. I still think a lot of room for us to go and improve there, but we are always trying to bridge that skills gap that I think is going to persist in the industry for a long time. So we want this in the hands of customers and let them to use it well.
And just let me add to that, Matt, too. I mean, you said it. I mean, that the skills gap and what we can do to help that has even widened over time. As Matt said in the beginning, people were downloading and literally building their own operating systems. We took that away, but even as an administrator or a user for that matter, you still had to be skilled. Even taking away, it was built and run for you. Now, as we move, and it's just in open source Linux-driven platforms are just running the enterprise, it's even about the consuming side. I don't mean the consumer market. I mean enterprises consuming how to build containers with their applications and how to use Kubernetes, etc. That's even complex now. So that's now we've moved into managed services where we even manage it for them. So we've really grown along the way from, open source at its early roots to actually building a set of bits that you can use, all the way up to we'll run the platform for you even. So we've really even progressed along that path along the way, and it's mainly because open source and Linux is basically driving much of the infrastructure today.
No, very well said, because being user, sometimes you just want to be consumer because you have a business to run. You don't really want to deal with all the complexity that comes with it. One more question that I have is that we have seen so many waves early days, from Linux, then containers, then Kubernetes. What is the next, Paul? I'll ask you, and then of course, Matt, I'll come to you. What is the next wave that you are seeing here? Is it 5G? Is it Edge? That you see, hey, this is further going to disrupt the industry, and once again, Red Hat, IBM will be there to help folks ride this wave. So what is the next that you see?
I mean, certainly Edge plays a huge part. Managed services plays a huge part, but that's still centered around hybrid cloud. Look, we've been talking about hybrid cloud, and Red Hat's been building the hybrid cloud for almost 10 years, eight plus years now. We were one of the first ones to see hybrid. And by hybrid, in the early days of cloud, there were many of our customers that hadn't even got into moving applications there yet that said, I'm going to move everything to one cloud provider tomorrow, right? And that was probably 12 plus years ago where we heard that. Once they got into trying to move their applications, they realized cloud brings a ton of value to them, but it's not necessarily, one cloud is not necessarily the right place for every application. A different cloud might have a better service in a different geography, or better set of services for what that application needs. Some applications might want to run on premise for various reasons, access to data, security, whatever. Right? Once they started to move that, they started to understood that. So that's how we kind of knew it was a hybrid world, because we're in the Linux business and it was all Linux. So, but it takes a while in the enterprise for things to really get adopted. We're in that phase of hybrid now. Edge is just an extension of hybrid, right? Managed services is under the hybrid umbrella. It's just we manage it for you. Now you're going to see you got to secure across the hybrid cloud, a new set of services that runs across the hybrid cloud. So now we have the architecture and the platform to build upon. And now it's, in the early days, and now it's building all around that, but in a hybrid model. So that's really, where we are and where the future's going. This is a 10 plus year technology transition, maybe even more technology transition that you see every 10 or so years, or maybe even 15 or so years in the technology market.
Matt, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, what I would say, Paul touched on the fact that our belief is that these edge workloads will be connected. And you actually touched on the first area that we focused on edge with, and that was 5G, because when we look at use cases outside of the data center and where they're going to go, that connectivity will probably be tied into 5G and the architectures that support it. And those inherently run at the edge. So we look for these compelling events in the industry where 5G, just given the volumes and proximity of how close that has to be to the users, you'll need a lot of them. But 5G will have to be tied into the core. That was actually one of the first areas we focused on edge, was in telecommunications. The reason for us is we believe that will be adjacent to practically every other edge use case. Automotive, we announced our collaboration with General Motors the year before with Functionally Safe Linux with Exida. Whether that's on the path to electric cars or autonomous vehicles, we know that work, and the connectivity in 5G will play a part of hybrid. We announced a few weeks ago the partnership with ABB, who makes robotic arms and drives factory automation. It'll be the same thing. That connectivity of machines in factories and bringing the intelligence will be tied to 5G, which will be tied to the rest of your infrastructure. So that's our passion with hybrid, of how do we enable these new types of applications. I think the analyst prediction was by 2024, there'd be an 800% increase in edge applications built. We want to allow enterprises to take the same skills that they've been building for decades at this point of building applications in the data center, make it as applicable as possible to let those developers build towards the edge as well. We're excited about it. It's a fun time Paul mentioned that you only see this a few times in your career or your company's existence, and we're at one of those times right now. So it's an exciting point to be at.
No, we are in a very, like, we have seen so many technological innovation ever since, it's like incredible. A lot of technology came and went, and we still do. And Edge and 5G private networks, they are going to create use cases that we cannot even, fathom at this point. So it's going to be a very exciting journey. I think, to be honest with you, we can sit for hours and discuss, but I think some of the key points that I wanted to touch upon is there. One thing that I do want to talk about before we wrap this up would be to better understand, the relationship, the synergy, the symbiotic relationship that you folks have with IBM. How should we look at this duo today?
So we really look at it as, one of the things that made Red Hat so successful was our ability to play Switzerland from an ecosystem perspective. And so we play no favorites. What we do with one partner, we're more than willing to do on the same terms with another partner. So, IBM, especially Arvind, CEO of IBM, saw that as a key thing for us. And so that was really driven. When Arvind and I started talking about this, we both understood that was really important, is that neutrality was really important. So that's been key. We've been a shepherd of that, and on the IBM side, he's been a shepherd of that. So we really look at that as that tight partnership. I think Arvind says it well. IBM's going to be opinionated on Red Hat. So for example, IBM with their software products are going to standardize on the Red Hat platforms, but it can't be the other way around. Red Hat's not going to be opinionated on IBM. We'll work with all the partners because that's what customers want. They want that broad ecosystem. And so and on the other side of the coin, IBM for us, they've been an amazing technology company for over 100 years. They have great access into the many C-suites in the largest companies in the world. And so they've given us some access that we might take and have more time to get on our own. So they build to our platforms. We partner together on those platforms as we do with others, but they give us much access in the market that we might not have gotten on our own. And I think that's really the basis for it. But we've got to be able to Arvind's made this very clear, both to the market and on the RBM side. Red Hat has the ability to drive their strategy and their execution strategy of where they need to go. And that's how Arvind and IBM look at it as well. So even if it might overlap with something that IBM's doing on their software side. So I think that understanding is core to how the relationship works.
Matt, anything?
Honestly, I think Paul covered it perfectly. It's like a soundbite of how we think of it is Red Hat. We're very passionate about bringing open source technology to every enterprise we can. IBM, working with IBM, helps us reach every single company on the planet with it. And we're both passionate about hybrid. We found that balance of independence and IBM's focus on that I think works really well for us in the market, works really well for IBM. So we're, and like Paul said, we've worked with Arvind for several years at this point. So we love his vision at the helm. We're really comfortable with that. And I think it gives us jointly a great opportunity.
You misspoke there that every planet, and I think as soon as we colonize Mars, that will also become reality because Linux and open source is already there on Mars. So I think you did not misspeak actually.
Yeah, we do have OpenShift running in the International Space Station, but it's not another planet yet. So we're planet in proximity.
It's on the way.
Yeah, it's on the way. That's right.
Yeah. Paul, Matt, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about Red Hat, IBM, the new challenges that are there. And as usual, I would love to have you folks back on the show. And hopefully someday we'll meet in person. Now COVID is gone, events are opening up. So thanks for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.